You are lying in bed, staring up at the ceiling in the middle of the night, and you are entirely focused on your feet. You are not focused on them because you want to be. You are focused on them because the simple cotton bed sheet resting across your toes feels like it is made of crushed glass. Every slight movement sends a sharp, unpredictable jolt of electricity up your leg. Or maybe your experience is the exact opposite. Maybe you are walking through your kitchen barefoot, and you look down because it feels like you're walking on thick, crumpled up wool socks, but your feet are completely bare. The floor is cold tile, but deep inside your foot, there's a low, simmering burn that never quite goes away. You rub your feet, you soak them in warm water, you mention it to your doctor, and you are handed a prescription for a nerve-numbing pill and told that this is just what happens when the circulation slows down. You are told it is just another unavoidable tax you have to pay for getting older. I used to believe that was the whole truth. My name is Harold Bennett. I'm 81 years old. I live in Scottsdale, Arizona, where the ground gets hot enough to bake bread in the afternoon, but there was a time a few years ago when my feet felt freezing cold to the touch, while simultaneously burning on the inside. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, in a working-class neighborhood where men like my father worked in manufacturing until their bodies gave out. My father spent his last years shuffling around the house, unable to feel the floor beneath him, constantly losing his balance and assuming his body was just shutting down. He never complained about it. He just stopped going outside. He stopped walking the neighborhood. He surrendered his independence to a numbness he thought he could not fight. I spent most of my adult life working in community health education, translating complicated medical concepts into language that ordinary people could use to protect their health. I used metaphors from construction, from auto shops, and from household plumbing to explain how the human body worked. I prided myself on understanding the machinery, and yet, when my own hands and feet started sending me contradictory, terrifying signals, I made the exact same assumptions my father did. After my wife Margaret passed away, I was living alone, and the slow, creeping changes in my extremities started to dictate my life. It began as a slight tingling, like a foot falling asleep, but it would not wake up. Then it became a burning sensation at night. And finally, the most terrifying phase began. The silence, the numbness. I realized how dangerous it had become on a Tuesday afternoon. I was driving down a busy road here in Scottsdale, and I suddenly realized I could not feel the resistance of the gas pedal through the sole of my shoe. I had to look down at my foot to see how hard I was pressing. My heart jumped into my throat. When you cannot feel the pedals of your car, your independence is effectively over. I pulled over into a parking lot, turned off the engine, and sat there, gripping the steering wheel, realizing that this was not just an annoyance. This was a crisis that was going to put me in a nursing home if I did not figure it out. I called my daughter Laura. She is a registered nurse up in Phoenix, and she has spent decades looking at the realities of aging bodies. She drove down to see me that weekend. I explained the burning, the numbness, and the terror of not feeling the gas pedal. I expected her to tell me to go to a specialist and get a stronger painkiller. Instead, she sat me down at the kitchen table and told me we needed to look at the electrical wiring of my house. Laura explained that the nerves running from the base of the spine all the way down to the tips of the toes are the longest individual cells in the human body. They are exactly like the electrical wires running from the main breaker box in your garage to the furthest guest bedroom in the house. Because that wire is so incredibly long, it is extremely difficult for the body to keep it supplied with energy. When the body encounters systemic stress, whether it is from chronic inflammation, wildly fluctuating blood sugar, or massive nutrient deficiencies, it goes into survival mode. It starts rationing power. It pulls the resources away from the furthest extremities to protect the vital organs in the center. Your feet and your hands are the first places to get their power cut. That tingling, burning pain I was feeling was not just bad circulation. Laura told me it was the biological equivalent of a lamp flickering at the end of a frayed extension cord. It was the sound of a nerve cell crying out for oxygen and fuel that it simply could not reach. It was a distress signal from a piece of living tissue that was slowly starving to death. And she explained that if I ignored the pain, eventually the nerve would just give up and die. The pain would stop, but the terrifying numbness would become permanent. Pain is a warning system. Numbness is the silence of a dead wire. I asked her why the wires were starving. I told her I ate reasonably well. I took a daily multivitamin. I went for walks. That is when my son, Daniel, who is a physical therapist in Denver and understands the mechanics of the body's internal structures better than anyone I know, got on the phone. Daniel explained a process to me that completely changed how I viewed my daily meals. He called it sugar rust. Daniel asked me to imagine taking a raw egg and dropping it onto the hot concrete of an Arizona sidewalk in July. The clear, runny egg white immediately cooks. It turns hard, sticky, and opaque. He told me that is essentially what slightly elevated blood sugar does to the proteins inside your body over the course of decades. Even if you are not a full-blown diabetic, years of eating processed carbohydrates and sugars create a sticky, toxic byproduct in the blood. This sugar rust coats everything. But it is especially devastating to the tiny microscopic blood vessels that are responsible for feeding your nerves. When those tiny supply lines get clogged with this sticky sugar rust, the nerve cannot get any fuel. It suffocates, and when a nerve suffocates, it misfires. It tells the brain that your foot is freezing when it is actually warm. It tells the brain that a cotton sheet feels like a pile of needles. And the standard medical response is usually to prescribe a pill that simply blocks the brain from hearing the signal. But muting the fire alarm does not put out the fire. The nerve is still starving. The rust is still there. I told Daniel I understood the rust, but I argued that I took a high-quality multivitamin every single morning. I thought I was giving my body the tools to fix itself. Daniel laughed, not out of disrespect, but out of frustration with the system. He told me that the standard multivitamin I was buying at the local pharmacy was part of the problem. He explained that the body actually has a built-in vacuum cleaner designed to scrub away that toxic sugar rust and protect the nerves. It is a specific enzyme. But that enzyme has a battery, and the only fuel that powers that battery is vitamin B1. If you do not have active vitamin B1 in your nerve tissue, the vacuum cleaner stays turned off, the rust accumulates, and the wire dies. Here was the fatal flaw in my routine. The vitamin B1 found in almost every commercial multivitamin on the grocery store shelf is a cheap water-soluble form. But your nerve cells are entirely wrapped in a protective layer of fat called the myelin sheath. It is exactly like the thick rubber insulation wrapped around a copper wire. Trying to push a cheap, water-soluble vitamin through a thick wall of fat is like trying to mix oil and water. They repel each other. I was swallowing that multivitamin every day, and 95% of it was washing right through my digestive system and ending up in the toilet. I had plenty of vitamins in my stomach, but my nerves were functionally starving because the fuel could not cross the barrier. Furthermore, I was taking a mild diuretic for my blood pressure, a water pill. Daniel explained that diuretics force the kidneys to flush out excess fluid, which is great for blood pressure, but it violently strips water-soluble vitamins right out of the blood. I was bailing water out of a sinking boat, but I was throwing my survival rations overboard with it. That conversation was the turning point. I did not need a stronger painkiller. I needed to bypass the blockage. I needed to clean the rust off the wires and rebuild the insulation. I worked with Laura and Daniel to establish a specific, targeted routine. It was not a miracle cure. It was a mechanical repair job, and it required specific tools that actually worked inside the human body, not just on a laboratory spreadsheet. The first change we made was throwing away the cheap water-soluble B1. Daniel had me order a specific fat-soluble derivative called benfotiamine. Because benfotiamine is fat-soluble, it does not need a special transport system to get into the body. It slides effortlessly through the stomach lining, through the blood vessels, and most importantly, it penetrates right through that fatty rubber insulation surrounding the nerve. It is the difference between splashing a bucket of water against a brick wall and using a high-pressure solvent to soak right through to the foundation. When that fat-soluble B1 flooded my starving nerve cells, it immediately turned on the internal vacuum cleaner. It started scrubbing away the toxic sugar rust that had been suffocating my wiring for years. But cleaning the wire was only half the job. The insulation around the wire was still frayed and tattered from years of damage. That is why nerves short-circuit and send those random stabbing pains. To rebuild the insulation, Laura had me add an antioxidant called R-lipoic acid. Not the cheap synthetic alpha-lipoic acid you find on the discount rack, which is poorly absorbed, but the stabilized natural form. R-lipoic acid is unique because it works in both water and fat, meaning it can travel to every single microscopic corner of the nerve cell to reduce the biological rusting. It acts as the raw material to patch the rubber casing around the electrical wire. And the final piece of the repair team was vitamin B12, but again, the form mattered immensely. If you look at the back of a cheap vitamin bottle, you will often see a form of B12 called cyanocobalamin. Laura warned me to stay far away from it. It contains a synthetic cyanide molecule that your liver actually has to work hard to detoxify before the body can even use the vitamin. Instead, I started taking methylcobalamin. It is the active construction worker form of B12. It goes straight to work, rebuilding the nerve tissue without forcing the liver to process toxic byproducts. Laura also gave me a stern warning about a trap many people fall into. When folks hear that B vitamins are good for nerve pain, they go out and buy massive high-dose B-complex supplements. They think more is better. But vitamin B6 is a strange exception to the rule. While a lack of B6 will cause nerve damage, taking massive doses of the synthetic form of B6 will actually build up in your tissue and become toxic to the exact same nerves you are trying to heal. I checked my old multivitamin and sure enough, it had a massive dose of synthetic B6. I had been unintentionally poisoning my own wiring. We made sure my new routine kept the B6 strictly moderate and only in the active form. But taking the right nutrients is only part of the equation. You cannot fix a rusted pipe if you keep pouring corrosive acid down the drain every single day. I had to change the environment inside my body. I had to stop the fire at the source. Daniel told me that if I was serious about feeling the pedals of my car again, I had to initiate a total oil change for my body. For years, I had been cooking with cheap industrial seed oils. Soybean oil, corn oil, canola oil. These oils are incredibly unstable, and when you consume them daily, they embed themselves into the membranes of your cells, making those cell walls stiff, rigid, and chronically inflamed. A rigid cell cannot absorb nutrients properly. I threw every bottle of clear vegetable oil in my pantry into the trash. I switched entirely to stable fats, olive oil, real butter, avocado oil. Fats that actually provide the healthy raw materials the body uses to build strong, flexible cell walls. I also had to face my relationship with sugar. I was not a big dessert eater, but I drank sweet tea and I drank fruit juices, thinking they were healthy. Liquid sugar is absolute rocket fuel for glycation. It spikes the blood sugar so violently that the internal vacuum cleaner is instantly overwhelmed and the sticky sugar rust coats the nerves immediately. I switched to black coffee, water, and unsweetened tea. I started taking a strict 10-minute walk after my largest meal of the day, specifically to use up the glucose circulating in my blood before it had a chance to settle and rust my nervous system. About 3 weeks into this new routine, something happened that almost made me quit. I woke up one morning and the burning in my feet was worse than it had been in months. The tingling was aggressive. It felt like tiny electric shocks running up and down my calves. I was angry. I felt like I had wasted my time and my money. I called Laura, ready to tell her the protocol was a failure and I was going back to the doctor for the numbing pills. Laura stopped me before I could even get the words out. She listened to my complaints and then she said something I will never forget. She said, "Dad, the tingling is worse because the line is live again." She told me to think about what happens when you sit on your foot awkwardly for an hour. The foot goes completely numb and dead. But when you stand up and the blood flow is restored and the nerve wakes up, it hurts terribly. It buzzes, it throbs, it burns. But that intense, painful buzzing is the feeling of life returning to dead tissue. The same exact mechanism was happening in my feet. The fat-soluble benfotiamine was clearing the blockage. The R-lipoic acid and B12 were patching the wires. The nerve was finally waking up from its suffocation, and waking up is a noisy, uncomfortable process. She told me that moving from silence to pain was actually the first necessary step backward toward normal sensation. She told me to hold the line. I trusted her, and I stayed the course. I added a high-quality magnesium glycinate supplement to my evening routine to help calm the overactive pain signals at night, which allowed me to finally get some unbroken sleep while the nerves did their repair work. It was not a rapid miracle. You do not rust out your internal wiring over 20 years and fix it in a weekend. It required patience. But around the third month, I had a realization. I was walking down the driveway to get the mail, and I felt the hard concrete beneath my shoes. I did not feel the sensation of walking on crumpled socks. The deep, agonizing burn that usually settled into my feet by the afternoon was gone. A few weeks later, I drove my car to the grocery store. I merged onto the busy road, and I realized I could feel the exact tension of the gas pedal beneath my right foot. I did not have to look down. The connection between my brain and the sole of my foot had been restored. The extension cord was carrying full voltage again. After 60, it is incredibly easy to accept a terrible narrative. We are conditioned to believe that pain, numbness, and the slow loss of our physical independence are just the non-negotiable terms of aging. We are taught to manage the decline rather than investigate the cause. But your body is an astonishingly resilient machine. Even when the wires are frayed and suffocating, the body is desperate to repair them. It just cannot do the job if you are feeding it the wrong raw materials and starving it of the specific fuel it needs. You do not have to accept the silence of a dying nerve. You do not have to resign yourself to a life of thick, numb feet and terrifying car rides. You simply have to understand the difference between cheap vitamins that wash down the drain and the right fat-soluble tools that actually penetrate the cellular walls. You have to stop pouring industrial oils and liquid sugar into an engine that is already struggling to clear the rust. Your independence is not lost all at once. It is lost in inches. It is lost the day you stop walking because your feet hurt too much. It is lost the day you hand over your car keys because you cannot trust your own legs. Fight for those inches. Give your internal wiring the materials it actually needs to rebuild the insulation. The tingling and the pain might be frightening, but they are signals that you are still alive and that your body is still trying to communicate with you. Answer the call. I am Harold Bennett. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time.